Good morning, everyone. It's Mrs. Wallace. I just wanted to do this quick video about some of the strikes, some of the things that you worked on in your homework. You can look at that capital and labor homework, and I wrote some comments on it. So if there's something that you put that I had a question about, I noted that. So this is just going to be a short description of some of the strikes, some of the key people, some of the unions, and a little bit about socialism, so I can give you a little bit of an idea of that. So the first thing is the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. The reason this strike is so significant for a couple different reasons. One is it is uh, it's an early strike. So there's, just hundreds and hundreds of strikes throughout the late 1800s into the early 1900s. This is a particularly large strike, and it becomes one that starts on one railroad and captures, other workers on other railroads. And this is all about protesting unfair wages and unsafe working conditions, which, at the time, the railroads were a really unsafe place to work. The strike is violent. It's something that the government gets involved in trying to suppress because it's interfering with cargo deliveries and with mail and things like that. And so President Hayes, same president during the end of Reconstruction, sends federal troops to put down the strikes. And this becomes a pattern. Today we might see like a president involving themselves in union activities. In the case of President Biden, there was involvement and support for the auto workers, and like recent strikes in this time period, the government is essentially using laws to enjoin the strikes, to stop them in their tracks. And that's pretty common for some time. And so some of the big early on issues that unions face is, their own legality. This gives you a sense of where the Great Railroad Strike took place. You can see kind of the hot spots in places like Pennsylvania, and all of the, strike activity is noted in pink. So you can see quite a bit, in the northeastern section of the country where we live, good part of New Jersey. Paterson is the site of a lot of strikes. So is Garfield. There's a variety of different strikes. And this is only over a 20-year time period from 1870 to 1890. The first union, a lot of you put this in your notes, is the Knights of Labor, which is almost like a big, large club of workers. They accept all workers as members, skilled and unskilled workers, black and white workers, women. So it's a very inclusive organization. And the idea was to use strikes to get workers greater rewards. By 1886 is probably the time they peak. There's about 700,000 members, and they meet in a variety of local organizations. So even though it's kind of a national union, there's kind of a lot of local players. So it has like a very, kind of localized approach, even though it is something that's much larger. So not these 700,000 people are meeting at one time, small hubs of people, and oftentimes, by geography. After the Haymarket Massacre, this is a union that will decline because it gets attached to anarchism, radical political ideas, and violence. In 1886, that's the time of the Haymarket Massacre. It's really the after effect of a strike that took place at the McCormick Reaper factory. McCormick Reaper is a product that you use in farming, so it makes farming the land and kind of towing the land a little bit easier. The strike is stopped by police, and that becomes kind of a rallying point for some of the workers. And this is a strike that is focused on getting the 8-hour workday, something that wasn't legally guaranteed in 1886. So you have this rally at Haymarket Square in Chicago, and the rally gets largely attended. Police show up, and a bomb is thrown. 7 police officers are killed, and there are 8 or so individuals who are charged and four or so who are hanged. You can see the mass meeting flyer, in the right-hand corner. Get a sense of how people might have found out about some of these events, just like, maybe, in our time, we find events like Monday's protest, on social media. You can also see that some of it's in German. It's, kind of attracting particular immigrant groups that happen to be localized in Chicago, in particular in the agriculture and meatpacking industries. And you can see on the left-hand side the graph that gives us a sense of membership of the Knights of Labor after 1886. After the Haymarket Massacre, there's a great deal of drop in the Knights of Labor. Around that same time period of 1886, we see a new labor union really come to the forefront, founded in 1881, and this is going to be a much larger union. It's actually still around. The AFL has combined with the Congress of Industrial Organizations, so it's like AFL CIO. If you see that, that's the union. And, for the most part, the AFL is going to be a significant union. We'll talk about it in a minute. Some of the public opinion of unions, in some cases, is strong amongst working class people. So you have quite a few people who are union people. You also have some public opinion that trends this downwards. The anarchists of the Chicago, Haymarket Square, you can see their images on the right. These are largely like German immigrants who were charged, likely wrongfully, in throwing that bomb. But because they had some radical political ideas, they get labeled as anarchists. These would be people who don't want to have a government structure in the way that it's organized. So anarchism is something that maybe is catching on internationally. We see this in a couple of spaces and movements within other societies, and there's resistance to it in the United States. We also see communism and socialism. So think of socialism as a group that ultimately is going to want workers to have the factors of production rather than capitalists. So socialism is really a critique of the capitalist economic system, and the idea of giving workers a much kind of greater share, in a sense, of what gets made in what we would today call profit. We kind of assume that a lot of the profit goes to the entrepreneurs that take the risk to develop a particular idea, but and shareholders and other groups of people who also take risks to engage in profit making activity. But socialists would argue that workers are really where the profit comes from. So because workers are paid less than their living wage, essentially, or only paid a living wage and not the actual value of their labor, there's a lot of discussions in the socialism of this time period about what is the value of labor. And a lot of the socialism of the time period is hinging on Karl Marx's ideas, which formally show up in capitalist like anti-capitalist essays, such as the Communist Manifesto, which is a speech in the 1848 time period. You also have Das Kapital, something that Marx wrote until the time of his death, and some of those ideas get shared. And there's, rising socialism in other parts of the world. Also, by early 1900s, we see socialist movements around the world, and that will include the brewing Russian Revolution, which, explodes in 1917. The American Federation of Labor, which is very much in favor of capitalism, but argues that there should be a grounds for reforming capitalism, and this should be done by using the government. So this is a very organized union. It is exclusive. It has in its membership largely skilled workers who are largely white men. This excludes quite a few industries. It doesn't include, for example, agricultural workers. There's a lot of groups of industrial workers that it doesn't include. You can see on the right Sam Gompers, who really tried to bring the working man's kind of status up in society, but he was really defending what he saw as skilled white men and trying to argue for more leisure time and greater protections in terms of safety, better working conditions, higher wages. He wrote a famous essay called What a Working Man Wants, and it very much is about leisure and time with family, higher wage to be able to take care of things at home. Some people suggested that working men, if they were given more wages, would just spend that time, on alcohol or whatever. So, what a working man wants, refutes some of those arguments and tries to put a working man in a much better light, especially amongst some immigrant industrial workers, Irish, Italian. There was some stereotyping about like saloon life. So, some of the issues that working people had to, overcome were some of the stereotypes about how they spent their money and how they spent their time. There was a lot of disapproval from some of the upper classes. The Homestead strike we looked at in class. This is Carnegie's plant. Of course, he's away traveling, and Henry Clay Frick is the manager. This is a strike that happens in Pennsylvania. There's a time when the potential strikers are locked out and scabs are hired. And, some of this comes from a group known as the Pinkerton Detectives. Workers were striking over pay cuts, and those workers were essentially replaced. There is conflict, so strikers and scab workers start to shoot at each other, and the security company of the Pinkertons is called to settle the violence. There is a great deal of conflict, and lots of people are killed. The National Guard is ultimately called to stop the violence. So it is a pretty raucous affair. It does indeed hurt Carnegie's reputation, but perhaps even more so, despite the fact that Homestead, in a sense, gains out of this, and there's a lot of attention to their cause. In the long run, it's another kind of knock against unions and violence, and lots of working people are afraid to attach themselves to it. You can see in this political cartoon that the Homestead Mill is kind of protected by, the Pinkertons and also by the federal government. Wanted 4,000 foreign pauper laborers, so it kind of gives you a sense, if you're a protected American workman, you're going to reduce your salary. So it's kind of a raw deal, the way union workers see themselves. The Pullman strike, which is really significant because it really catapults socialism to the forefront in America. In 1894, the Pullman car company workers go on strike, and there's some sympathy strikes that happen around the country with other railroads. The Pullman Rail Company was actually made in a company town called Pullman. This is Pullman, Ohio. And the company town is a really strange kind of invention of corporations. Basically, the people who worked in Pullman are paid in script, where they can shop in Pullman and pay rent in Pullman. So there's not really resources to go outside of Pullman. And at one point in time, the rent increases. You need more script in order to pay the rent, but wages in script don't go up. And so people strike, and ultimately this becomes, a really big strike. One of the organizations is this union of railroad car workers, and Eugene Debs at the time is a leader. At the time, he is not a socialist, but ultimately he does become a socialist after being thrown in jail for ignoring the federal order to end the strike. The strike gets enjoined by the federal government. They mandate that it stop. The courts give a thumbs up to this to be constitutional activity, and Eugene Debs gets jailed. It's not the first time he's jailed. He'll run for president, as a socialist many times, but he does radicalize and become a socialist in jail, and he does really create kind of a movement that lots of people follow who are working class people, which is really advocating for less of a capitalist model and more of a model that puts working working people, at the forefront. And this merges with other international movements that are attempting to do the same thing. And, in reality, the socialists become very divided. There are very left-wing socialists and some that are a little less so, socialists that want to use violence and socialists that don't. So there's a variety of different groups. And, Debs is somebody who is an advocate largely for a style of socialism that puts workers at the forefront, but doesn't remove kind of the role of the government, has a strong role for the government. There's another union that develops called the Industrial Workers of the World. It is a socialist union, so one to keep in mind.